So I live in the southern eastern corner of South Dakota. There aren't a lot of wooded areas down here, but there are some. My boyfriend and I have been spending a lot of time exploring the few wooded areas that we have. Yesterday afternoon we went to this one area. We would not have expected anything to happen because it was still decently close to the town of Brandon. If anything, our concern would have been people. This park wooded area has lots of things to explore for the area, and we brought one of his friends with us. We are more intense with our hikes than he is, so he let us leave him behind, and we went exploring off the beaten path and did our own thing. By the time we were getting back to the area we left him, the sun was starting to set, and he wasn't there, so we called him up, and he said he was heading back to the car. It's important to note that during this time, we were making these screams back and forth at each other, trying to see if we could hear each other beyond the phone. My boyfriend and I had one more trail we wanted to explore, so we headed down the trail, and then eventually it was actually getting dark, so we made it back to the trail that took us back to the car. We were walking through the woods and joking about how a friend was probably going to try and scare us or some shit. We saw a deer and didn't think anything of it, but it slightly startled me originally. Finally, we made it to this area where the woods start to turn to the prairie, and we heard this scream and a really fast deer jumped through this tree that was split into two branches. We, being logical, started calling out to his friend, being like, "Hey, you got us, not funny." But like, it clearly wasn't our friend. We're a little on edge after that, but just picking up our pace getting into the car. Him and I took turns kind of looking behind us, and I saw what looked like an obese man just kind of standing on the trail behind us. But it had more of a ghost-like presence to him than an actual man. My boyfriend looked back at some point and said, "Hey, I don't want to scare you, but it almost looks like there's a person back there or something." My face just dropped, and I said word for word, "You saw it too?" And then we just kind of looked at each other and ran. We ended up taking the wrong path, so we had to run a lot longer. We eventually made it back to the car. His friend was there, and he swears on his life he wasn't fucking with us. Either way, no way could this dude have run that fast, or looked like what we saw behind us. When we got home, we started to look up stuff. We think it could be a skinwalker, but also this is South Dakota. We're on Lakota Sioux land, not Navajo land. Either way, it was a very creepy experience. This started when I was at my childhood friend's apartment for what was supposed to be a fun little movie night. We hadn't hung out in a while, and we were catching up. Her place was cozy, a little disorganized, and full of girly decor. We were in our comfiest sweatpants about to watch princess movies. Her apartment isn't the most tidy. Things are a bit scattered around, but it's clean and so authentic, which always made me feel at home. We decided on ordering pizza for dinner. She mentioned that Sherwood, someone I hadn't met yet, would bring the pizza over. At first, I was not happy to hear that. I thought that meant she had invited other friends over to join us. Which wasn't what I had in mind, but I was in for the surprise. Sherwood turned out to just be our delivery guy for the night. He wasn't joining us. When he got to the apartment, there was this awkward air about him. He was obviously nervous, fumbling a bit with the pizza boxes, and not quite making eye contact. My friend introduced us quickly, and it was clear from her overly thankful demeanor that Sherwood did a lot more for her than just fetch dinner. After handing us the pizza, there was this brief moment of forced small talk. My friend was super nice to him despite his awkwardness. He wasn't the best conversationalist and seemed really out of place. Then Sherwood asked for my number. I was in a tough spot because our mutual friend was sitting right there, so I just gave it to him. Yeah, we chatted for maybe 5 minutes before my friend gave him a cue to leave with something like, "Thank you so much for dropping this off." He seemed to get the hint. We both gave him like a hug before my friend said something like, "Drive safe," giving him another kind of cue to leave. When I asked my friend what that was all about, she explained that Sherwood was her unpaid personal assistant. He did her grocery shopping, he dropped off pizza, and he did all this other stuff. I think Sherwood was just a really lonely guy desperate for interaction, especially female interaction. My friend and I were both young and immature back then. We were about 23, but I think we both knew something was seriously wrong with Sherwood. It was a little hard to articulate because we couldn't point out exactly what his problem was. Sherwood started a group chat with me and my friend. He just sent a meme or two every week. It felt like he was trying to stay relevant without being intrusive. Maybe he was used to being sidelined or even blocked by other girls in the past. It felt like he was trying to make me remember him, but also carefully trying not to give me a reason to block him too. I can't speak on his behalf, that's just what it felt like. Sherwood also helped with errands. The first time, I said, "Thanks for asking, but no thank you." He asked every weekend after that. One day I made the mistake of accepting his help. I knew better, but I just did. I had recently found a great deal for a new washing machine on Craigslist, but I had no idea how to pick it up and install it. When I mentioned in the chat, Sherwood excitedly volunteered to take care of the whole thing. He handled the whole pickup and installation like a total champ, which saved me so much hassle. I tried to pay him for his efforts because I wanted to show appreciation, but he wouldn't accept my money. I insisted, and eventually he suggested that I could repay him by joining him for a hike. I was uneasy about this. It felt a bit too personal and almost like it could be mistaken for a date. But Sherwood framed it as nothing more than a friendly outing, like a transaction to balance out the favor. I agreed to the hike. I rationalized it by telling myself that it was a fair trade for installing the washing machine and that it was genuinely a form of payment, especially since I didn't think he had too many friends. This hike felt like maybe a way for him to have some companionship. I thought it might be nice helping him. Part of me was still uneasy about spending time with him in such an isolated setting. The day of the hike, Sherwood picked this trail that was nearby. I had been there before, it's gorgeous. As we walked along together, he chatted about ordinary things like work, the weather, and his hobbies. Everything seemed normal until he suggested we go off the main path to see something special he wanted to share. Like, what could that even mean? We reached the secluded spot, and there was a dead body. My heart pounded so violently as Sherwood stood there so eerily calm and nonchalant. The casualness in his demeanor made me feel even more uneasy. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a dead body, but also revealing this darker side of him. It smelled bad, but not like in the movies. I didn't even know how long it had been there. I'm not a biologist, but my guess is that it had smelled a lot worse before, but now it had gone down. At that moment, I mumbled some excuse about needing to go back quickly and started walking briskly towards the main path. I was urging Sherwood to follow me. I thought this was some twisted mind game, like a way to intimidate me or show that he wasn't just some harmless little boy. Maybe he was trying to send a message that said, "You should know I'm familiar with things like this." Oh, there's another possibility. Maybe he just wanted me to think about him more. Sometimes when I talk to people, I feel like they only notice me for the time that we're together, and then they won't think of me again until the next time we meet. It's possible Sherwood felt that way with me, and maybe he thought showing me a dead body would make him less forgettable. I have no idea. But on the surface, he seemed oblivious to how inappropriate this was. As we walked back together, I was in full fight or flight mode, instinctively looking around to see if there were other hikers or rangers, anyone who could make me feel like I wasn't alone. The moment I spotted someone else on the trail, I called out, not to expose Sherwood, but just asking for directions back to the parking area. I wanted to make sure Sherwood and I wouldn't be left alone together. I asked the gentleman to walk us back to the parking lot. I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I kept pretending like I was confused about his directions, and eventually he agreed to just walk us there. Getting help from that guy was my way of re-anchoring myself to safety and normality, while I was still under the shock of what Sherwood had shown me. We got to the parking area. There I called my friend and told her I was with Sherwood. I suggested he could drop me off with her and that we'd be there in 20 minutes. Sherwood agreed. That was my way of making sure that if anything happened, it was on the record that Sherwood was the last person to have been with me. Also, I immediately texted my friend what had happened to get that on record too. When I got to her apartment, we said thanks to Sherwood and kindly told him to go away. I had already told her through text, but then I started going into all the details. The fact that the body had insects, the fact that the face was decomposing but still recognizable, etc. Her reaction was pure horror. Not just about the dead body, but also how nonchalantly Sherwood had treated the whole situation. She confessed she always sensed something was off about him, even though she never imagined anything this disturbing. We both agreed that we needed to remove Sherwood from our lives. She admitted she felt stuck, and she had become too reliant on Sherwood to just fire him cold turkey. We planned out how we could do it. It was this gradual phasing out plan. We would limit our interactions to times when others were present, We would slowly reduce our response to his texts. I would never ask for his help again, and my friend would ask for less and less help. Sherwood kept texting during weekends, offering to run errands or asking if we needed anything, to which my friend would reply, "I'm trying to work on being more independent, but you've been such a nice help." Eventually, as my friend started dating someone new, she introduced Sherwood to her boyfriend. Sherwood never contacted her after that. I had called the cops the same night of the incident, but it was a while before we heard more news about it. At least a full month later, a news report confirmed discovering a dead body in that area where Sherwood had taken me hiking. They made an arrest, not of Sherwood, but of this other guy that Sherwood followed on Instagram. I have no idea if Sherwood was connected to the murder. Reflecting on everything, I think there's one clear moral of the story. Trust your instincts. I once met up with an old friend of mine, a friend I had known for a few years prior to the meetup in November 2017. I had actually met this person on a dating site. However, as time went on, the relationship between us became strictly platonic. So I completely trusted this person. We met up in a town behind a bus station on a grassy hill surrounded by trees and a tall wall. Our meeting was just to have a smoke, get a little high, and to have a small catch-up. The meetup was fine. I'd actually started smoking weed a few months before, so I was still relatively new to it. He had brought something new for me to try, purple haze. I wasn't at all anxious about trying it as I completely trusted this person. I would never believe that he would lie to me. He had packed a full blunt for me, but I only managed to smoke a quarter of the blunt. We spoke during this time, about work, our previous relationships, and random stuff. About half an hour later, I started to feel extremely lightheaded and anxious. I suddenly had this strange feeling where I did not feel comfortable at all, and I really wanted to go home. When I asked him if I could go home, he offered to take me home, but I said no, it's okay. He offered again. "Please, let me take you home. You'll be safe with me. I won't hurt you." I shook my head and said, "No thank you, I can take myself home." When I started to walk away, I felt like I was walking on a cloud. My head became dizzy and my eyesight was a little blurry. But I never felt like this before, and in time, I started to panic. When we made our way down the hill towards the bus station, I was relieved, as there were a lot of people around, so if anything happened, someone would step in. I became extremely terrified of him. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that told me to get away from him, and when I got to the bus station, I told him I would call my taxi here and go home. His tone was no longer nice, but very stern. "I'm gonna take you home now." And he began to pull at my jacket. I told him no, and that I was going home on my own. And then he pulled my jacket harder and I fell against him. He pulled me into him and told me I didn't need to be scared of him. But I was. I was so terrified. At this point I started to feel very paranoid, and I couldn't see properly. I pushed him away from me and rubbed my eyes and called for a taxi. He tried to pull my phone from me and yelled in my face, "Do you ever listen? I'm taking you home." I noticed a few people had stopped and asked if I was okay. All I remember was that I wanted to go home. So Lei kindly called a taxi for me and waited with me, made sure I was okay and helped me into the taxi. During the time when I waited for the taxi, he kept trying to get me to come to his car with him. But the lady that looked after me told him to go home and that she was going to take me home instead. So he left. When I got home, I gave the taxi driver money and told him to keep the change. I didn't want to wait around. I just wanted to get into my bed because at that time it was the only place I would feel safe from harm. That evening, I laid in my bed for 5 hours straight, staring at the ceiling. I don't remember if I thought about anything or if my mom came in at any time. I just remember laying in bed doing nothing until the paranoia and the sickly feeling began to wear off. I remember looking at my phone and seeing I had 32 missed calls from him, 10 voicemails left, and 50 plus messages. The messages were weird. He had sent around 20 messages just asking where I was and when I got home. And in one of the voicemails, he had told me how he had this fantasy of taking me home whilst drugged up and tying me up. He wanted to blindfold me and he wanted me to submit myself to him. I freaked out and blocked him on all social media, and I even blocked his number. Before the blocking, I told him if he ever contacted me again, then I would call the police. I heard nothing from him for a month, until I received a text from an unknown number asking me how I was. I hadn't given my number to anyone, so I ignored it. Then received another message a few minutes later saying they missed me and that they would see me soon. I asked who they were, but I got no response.